Have you ever seen a fight at a funeral? Well, if you're a business owner, let's talk about a few ways to avoid one at yours. I don't know, Chris, have you ever seen a fight in a funeral? I
That's
sadly saw one time.
seriously, like, fortunately, no, I haven't seen an actual brawl, but I have witnessed some dirty looks flying around the room. And honestly, you never know which is worse. It kind of says, like, stay out of this, or the one you start kind of wondering, wait, are they really glaring at you that way right after somebody passed away? Like, I've seen some awkward stuff, like Texas, am I right? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's some serious animosity at the one that I was at, but thankfully it was only one time. But today, this is not reality television, but we do talk about real life drama on here, and we're going to talk about why business owners need to plan so that there isn't this kind of animosity one day when that does end up happening, and there has to be a funeral situation like that. Welcome back to Planning Reimagined for our audience. I'm Celeste Moya. I'm joined by advanced planning genius Kris Stegall. And today we're going to talk about how even the most successful family businesses can crumble overnight. If a death or a disagreement or something like that hits before there's any planning that takes place, it can be a giant disruptor. And we've seen a lot of situations, sadly, through the years where that's been the case. So, we're going to dive into one of the most overlooked conversations when it comes to business succession, which is why multi owner businesses, so when there's more than one business owner, many times the families we work with have family owned businesses that are owned by multiple generations as well, why these need to be properly structured, why they need to have some kind of buy sell agreement. And most importantly, and very vital, that these buy sell agreements be funded. And we'll talk about what that means when we say funded, because this is not just legal paperwork for a business. It really is a lifeline that determines if the business will survive tragedy, or if it's going to be, have to be taken apart, sold, auctioned off when tragedy does happen to strike. Today's story that we are talking about is about the Smith family, very hardworking family, thriving enterprise. But sadly, they were impacted not only by the death of one of their sons, but he was also a key person in their family business. And so this brought to them a lot of financial and operational fallout. Very much something that could have been avoided, but once again, we will talk about that today. So as a reminder, all of our stories come from our very popular series Story of the Week. If you're not yet receiving that email, if you can go to the show notes and you can add your information and we can get you subscribe to that list. So, and also please don't forget to like and subscribe our podcast. It really helps us get the message out. So, Chris, we'll jump into it. As you always say, the greatest threat to a business isn't competition, it's complacency. So, if you want to share a little bit more about the Smiths to start.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, honestly, it's a tale as old as time. We see this kind of thing happen across all types of businesses, no matter the industry or the size of it. It's one of those situations that's way more common than people realize. I know we'll get to that later in the show. Everything always starts with good intentions, but they end up in headaches when basically there's no plan in place. And like I said, this one's about the Smith family. This was a father and three sons that spent a lot of their lifetime building a really significant landscaping empire. We're talking multiple subsidiaries, hundreds of employees. Like, this is a true potential family legacy. But then in all of these situations that unfortunately we get to talk about, tragedy strikes, right? And in this case, one of the sons, his name is James. He was basically their operational heartbeat. Like, he ran the show. He unfortunately passed away rather unexpectedly. So here's what happened. They had no buy-sell agreement, so they had no map for transferring ownership. So it left the dad and the two other brothers kind of in a mess of trying to figure out what to do. James also had all of his assets personally owned, including the business interests. So those exposed him to debts and some estate claims. And while he was really good at running a business, his personal life and debt stuff was a little bit shaky. So that caused some significant creditor chaos because, again, his personal debts were coming into fruition there. And then also, they got a new partner by default. So no siblings or a father wants to wake up one day and realize that they're now in business with James's wife, she inherited all of his shares. She had no business experience. She didn't work. She had no clarity about the business. She really had no idea how any of it operated. She really stayed at arm length with the brothers and the father and the company, but now here she was thrust into it as a significant business owner. There was no liquidity, there was no life insurance, there's no funding to help out with the buy sell because again, there was no buy sell, so why would you fund it? And then on top of all of this, somebody lost a son, somebody lost a brother, and somebody lost a spouse. So on top of all of these things that were going on emotionally with how to handle the company, they were all grieving as well. So it's financially destructive, it's operationally paralyzing again because he ran the show for the company, and they lost somebody important in their lives. So, this one again, one gap in planning really opened all of these floodgates for all of these problems, and really in every single direction. And like I said, unfortunately, this isn't just like a one-off case. These kinds of situations play out every single day in businesses everywhere. So, Celeste, I know you've seen the statistics on how widespread this issue really, really is. You want to walk through just how big, and it really is an epidemic, like how big this epidemic is for family-owned businesses.
Yeah, to your point, just to reiterate, this isn't just some kind of crazy extreme situation. We sadly see this more often than not, where there just hasn't been the planning. I would say almost every day, there's some successful families losing its business. And it's not because of the market generally. It's because they didn't plan for it. There was silence around the planning. And if you have a plan, but it only lives in your head, then as terrible as it sounds, it dies with you too. So there needs to be more than that. There's a lot of statistics out there. One that we most commonly hear is that nearly 70% of family owned businesses fail to survive the first transition to the next generation. That is a huge percentage considering the amount of effort it takes to build a family business, all the hard work that goes behind it. Also, two-thirds of owners have no documented succession plan at all. So there's nothing there that says if something happens, here's who's going to take over, here's who has the actual expertise to fit into this role or that role. And as you know, in every company, like you said, James was involved in the operations. There's other folks that were involved in the actual, sites that they were at. But that operations was such a key point to everything they did. Um, so another really important statistic to keep in mind is that about 46% of business owners have a buy-sell agreement, but only about 20 to 25% of them are funded. And so when we say funded, we mean, okay, Kris and I own a business, we have a buy-sell agreement, I die. If there's nothing to buy out my spouse with, then it doesn't really matter if the buy-sell is there, right? Because there's nothing to actually make that purchase from that new partner that you inherited and probably did not want to work with. Most of the time, buy sells are funded with life insurance because it's a very easy, cost efficient way to do it. We see term insurance used a lot, in some cases, permanent life insurance, particularly in these family owned businesses where it's for a long period of time. They're not looking to sell. It's really a legacy for their family. But the consequences of not having those buy sells in place, as you mentioned, are incredible. Frozen operations, partner disputes, especially when you have a new partner. And think if you have, we see this a lot too, where the new partner, the spouse, maybe doesn't even like the rest of the family.
So
They don't,
true.
or the other family doesn't like that spouse. And I mean, it doesn't matter, husband or wife. Or now all of a sudden there's a level of greed that comes in, or just this control they've never had before. And they really, must really try to take over more than really they should. And so that's an issue. Obviously, estate taxes, forced liquidation of businesses. I actually experienced this about 5, 7 years ago with some brothers in the South Texas area where one of them passed away and they ended up having to sell the business just to be able to survive all of the financial disruption and damage that was done. And then also employees and clients become collateral overnight too, right? So it's not just the family, the business, everything that trickles down beyond that. Now you have, depending on the type of business, there's clients that could be hurt in the process too. So, it's something important for business owners to think is, what's your plan if your partner's spouse inherits, if your passes away, now their spouse inherits their portion of the business and they decide now they want that seat at the table. Do you really want to be their partner? Or can you plan for it? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, no, I think that question really cuts it to the core. Without a clear buy-sell agreement, no one has ever addressed the basics of who buys, who sells, and how, and it just leaves the door wide open for surprise situations like a partner spouse suddenly claiming ownership and demanding a say at the board table. Like nobody wants that, right? And I think that the Smith situation, it impacts all of these classic pitfalls that you just outlined and that we talked about. But meant no clarity and no safeguards for ownership transitions. Nothing, right? It's like what is the statement? Well, I'll get to that one in a second. Actually, with assets personally titled, everything was exposed to the risk. So again, lawsuits, future divorce claims, if that's a thing, like all of those potential pitfalls existed. To your point, no insurance or liquidity meant none of the surviving owners could afford to buy out, even if they wanted ones. In the instance of the Smith family, they had to take on a significant amount of debt to try to buy out the spouse to try to make it work, which meant their income was now encumbered and the company's income was now encumbered, which is not something that they were expecting. The cash flow wasn't designed for that at all, right? And then without any kind of agreed upon valuation, which is another problem that happens when buy-sell arrangements aren't put in there, is really the IRS and not the family who help decide how much the business was worth. That's not something that anybody wants either. You want to go in there with a clear idea of how much your business is worth, so you can draft up the paperwork and really put pen to paper on how it's going to transition, is how much it's going to go into transition for, right?
Mhm.
I feel like this happens a lot. Everyone kind of assumes that we'll work it out. We see this a lot with families. They kind of have the handshake agreement. My brothers will always take care of my family, and I wish that were true. But it just in practice it just doesn't work, and it just creates a lot of stress. Without that kind of real clear communication, it really just leads to like confusion, a lot of emotional issues, and then obviously and eventually conflict, right? So kind of going back to your statistics, it's no wonder that, 40, actually, I think it's more than 45% of multi-generational businesses actually cite family conflict as a top reason for transition failures. It all kind of boils down to loss of control and trust, and what should be handled as a seamless succession always ends up leading to a battleground for those folks that are involved, right? And so I think, to kind of throw another question back to you, I mean, I think that, would families that you're working with rather have the hard conversations now while there's still reason in the room and all the initial stakeholders at the table, or do you want to have your family fight it out through probate when grief and emotion and resentment starts to take over, right? It's not good.
100%. Yeah, and it's your comment about we'll work it out. We hear that
Oh,
so
yeah.
often, whether it's for business planning or some of the regular other, estate family planning that we help do. And I always tell clients, I'm like, hey, I know your children are great. I know your siblings are great. However, money does funny things to people, and it is so much better if everything is just outlined clearly. So, what could have been the fix? We were not there. We weren't brought in, to the planning prior to this happening in the Smith family. We were brought in after, when everybody that was left to pick up the pieces realized that they needed to do the planning. But what is the fix? What can be done? What do we mean by business planning? So, first of all, having the proper agreements in place. The first one we mentioned right here, buy sell agreement. There's other things that need to be incorporated, but that type of agreement defines buyout terms if there's a death, a disability, a retirement, an exit, if somebody just wants to leave and doesn't want to be a part of it and they want to be bought out. There's so many beyond just the life insurance for a death, there's other important reasons why there needs to be different types of funding mechanisms within these agreements. Some kind of valuation methodology that is agreed upon, that it is going to be accurate to ensure the business valuation is done properly. And all of this also, this agreement's gonna make sure that the ownership is concentrated and it doesn't go into unintended hands, right? It's gonna stay within the folks that really are the shareholders that have been there to build the business, who should be there, or who even want to be there for that matter. Now, on the funding side of a buy-sell agreement, we've talked about life insurance. That's one of the simplest, cleanest ways to do it. At a partner's passing, it's gonna provide pretty much immediate liquidity liquidity, and there's a lot of tax benefits around life insurance. So generally speaking, life insurance proceeds, the death benefit is paid tax free. And so now, like in the Smith situation, if there had been life insurance on James, they could have easily taken that liquidity and paid his wife so that they could buy her out from the business. And that also gives her financial stability because she also lost her financial stability. So maybe we're bad mouthing the spouses, right? But at the same time, they have to look out for their well being, their family's well being. And so that might be the reason why they say, well, I have to be involved in the business, so they're going to cut me out, right? So that's another reason to have it, is to give that other family some stability. And then the structure, there's different ways that can be structured. The key thing is making sure it's compliant with current regulation, with current things that we've seen happen. We could talk about Connolly, right, Chris, and all that happened there. But essentially, if you already have a buy sell in place, have it reviewed, ensure it's not going to have any issues where maybe some of the business proceeds or any of the policy proceeds are brought back into your own estate. And if you don't have one yet, ensure that when it's set up properly. And that's something that we're always happy to discuss as well. And then lastly, but really, really important, it's not a set it and forget it. As your business grows, the need to update those agreements is crucial. Do you have a new business partner? Is there now a niece or a nephew that's going to come into the business and now they've been working there and their partner? We had a situation where in his will, the grandfather had said, I want my grandkids to take over my portion of the business, because when he wrote it, there was only about, I think it was like 3 adult grandkids. When he passed away, there was about 18 of them, some of which were underage. And it was a giant mess because he didn't intend for his other children to have 18 partners, some of which were minors, right? So it just had never been updated. And make sure that the amount that it's funded for is still accurate for, each of the folks that is in there, because we see that quite a bit. So it's important, like, when to start now, today, yesterday, you haven't, look into a buy sell, reach out to an attorney that can help you get one in place. Our contact information will be here as well. We're always happy to have that conversation, and just start today, because you want to make sure that, God forbid anything happened, but sadly it does. And we want to just be prepared for it.
Yeah, I know for sure. And some of it is about the numbers itself, right? And how do you fund a buy sell agreement, and how much you actually fund it with to make sure everybody's protected. But and I think we've talked about this a little bit, but the human cost of this, like the emotional toll that this takes on families, is immense, because again, you're going through this grieving process, but you have all of these other things that are going to move in and around you even through that moment. It makes everything much more difficult to work through. So if you can take that side off and say the buy sell is funded, at least you know the mechanics of how the estate and the money is going to flow, and everybody can move on and kind of grieve and do their thing, which is much more important, hopefully, than trying to figure out how business interests are going to be moved around. So, in the Smith family, James's spouse, to your point, we spent a lot of time talking about the siblings a little bit, but, again, she was grieving and completely overwhelmed. She was an involuntary owner in this whole thing all of a sudden. And we don't know how that relationship is going to materialize, year over year, as they try to figure out what to do with their business interests, and as she becomes more vocal in what they're doing in their company. I think that this also created some stress amongst the siblings. Like, it's easy to start pointing fingers at each other and say, why didn't we do this? I told you we should do this. I had a family that I was working with. It was brothers, and they had a car dealership. And I had 2 brothers on board to do their buy-sell arrangement, but the third brother was holding off. He wasn't willing to share some of his information with us so that we could complete the process. And instead of the other 2 brothers moving forward, they put a pause until the third brother would get on board. And unfortunately, one of the 2 that were willing to go through with it, once they got the third brother on board, actually passed away. And that was a pretty crappy situation to deal with. But again, that finger pointing becomes very real very, very quickly in emotional moments. And creditors do have leverage in these types of situations. They will start making those phone calls if they are concerned that that income is going to stop coming in. Like you said in the example of the spouse here, like she doesn't know how income is going to come into that family anymore from the business, but those creditors are going to start calling. That's a real issue. And then you also have circumstances where, we haven't touched on this really at all, but employees start to lose confidence. And clients can start losing trust in the company as well. So if your operator, the one who's running the show, passes away, and you don't have that immediate person to kind of step in there or the capital to go find the right person to do that, that can create some problems for the business in and of itself. That's even outside of dealing with the buy-sell arrangement, right? So the fallout, the waiting to plan, really, it's not just financial, it's emotional. It can be cultural from the business perspective, and clearly generational. So in this example, how we're dealing with the father, the siblings, and the spouse. As Dwight D. Eisenhower once said, "Plans are nothing. Planning is everything." Make sure your buy-sell arrangements are funded. So, if your spouse did inherit your business tomorrow, would it be a blessing for her? Him, or would it be a burden for him or her? You should sit back and ask yourself that question.
Really? Sure. And with the business, as we mentioned, there could be debt, right? In the situation, there was debt that was inherited. It was his. But there was some business debt, and now automatically that person also has this business debt that they don't know what to do with, but they're liable for. So it's very complicated, multi-layered kind of issues that happen. So just a few practical takeaways. I can't say this enough. Draft your buy-sell agreement
Yeah,
yesterday.
please.
This year, it doesn't have to be expensive. It's not complicated. It's a standard document that any attorney can help you, I'd say somebody that focuses in business planning can help you get in place. Make sure it's funded for life and for a death, for a disability. I would say those are the kind of the two key things that we see because liquidity is going to be litigation every single time. So not only is it going to cost the business owners that stay behind the cost of having to find some way to liquidate this other to buy out this other person, but if there's litigation, there's the cost of that too. Value the business regularly, know what it's worth. You don't want the IRS to come in and give you a surprise valuation. And involve all of the stakeholders. Communication is going to prevent chaos. If that includes a potential partner like a spouse, I think it's better for them to understand if the preparation isn't there, or maybe there's only so much funding that can be done for whatever reason. It's very much easier for them to go in knowing, like, here's what could potentially happen. I am not a fan of, we're going to keep it a secret from our kids how much they're worth, or like they're going to inherit something one day. Same situation. You don't want your spouse surprised by all of a sudden what happens if you're not there. So don't let the government, a grieving spouse, a creditor, decide your family's financial future. The time to plan isn't after a tragedy, unfortunately, like it was here. It's definitely before it. And that may sound like, thank you, Captain Obvious, but as Kris and I know, because we see this every day almost, it's not anything is that people want to generally talk about or want to own the fact that we are mortal. I always joke about how as business owners, many of us tend to think we're immortal, but it's such an important topic to own, to talk about, and to get serious about once again before that tragedy happens. So that's the story for today. It was a tough one for sure, Kris. Thankfully, there's some stuff we can help the family with going forward, but we can't really help what's already happened in the past.
Yeah, no, that's right. The Smith story is tough, but the good news is, the situations like this are, it's fixable, it's preventable, right? You just reach out to us, and we can help you figure it out. And we have put together some additional resources and some practical material and structuring and funding buy sell agreements. You can see those in the show notes. I think I point down for that, right? With show notes down below. And don't forget, if you like what you're hearing, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll get our story of the week delivered straight to your inbox. You definitely don't want to miss these real life lessons that we provide every single week. I think they're good and useful for folks.
Absolutely. Well, and next time our formats can be slightly different. So we want to continue in the business planning kind of conversation. So next time we're going to be discussing the the 10 biggest disruptors, sorry, for or risks for business owners. You definitely want to miss that. Really important information, things you want to also be aware of and not just turn a blind eye to. So, like Chris mentioned, like and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on Planning Reimagined, and we will see you next time. Bye.